So this whole message, this whole podcast is going to be about anger. It's going to be about tapping into it, about maybe being playful around anger, and really inviting you guys into the process of acknowledging and no longer hiding from your anger, but utilizing it as a resource. And it's going to be good. It's going to be huge.
Yeah, I just love the fact that we're going to be able to give not only ourselves, but the people listening permission unto anger. And we get to unvillainize it, like I'm going to talk about in a minute. Is that a word? I don't know if it's a word.
Unvillainize?
Unvillainize.
It is now.
It is now.
Caseypedia.
We're making it a word right now. It's been the villainized emotion. And so just normalizing it for everyone that's listening. Can't tell if Maduno's staring at us.
He is. He's looking into your soul.
I can't tell if he's looking at me or not. He's winking.
You're like the Terminator meets a gingerbread man. You're welcome.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'm Zach Saleh, and welcome back to the show. I have an incredible co-host with me, Catherine Camille Woodward. Casey in the house.
Hi.
So nice and gentle. Casey is, for those of you who are listening for the first time, Casey is not only one of my closest friends, she's an ally in my circle. She is someone who not only I confide in personally as someone who holds space for me, but also a leader, a creative artista herself. And yeah, I'm really excited about being part of what it is that you're going to pursue and you are pursuing right now. It's a really long-winded answer.
No, thank you. Well, I appreciate you having me on the show, Zach.
Sure, you're always here. It's fine.
I'm not always here. I'm never in this seat, I would say. Yes, I'm part of your team, but I appreciate you allowing me to sit down and chat through what we're going to chat through today and just have a voice around it. And yeah, I'm just excited to be here. So thank you.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Mm-hmm. Pleasure. One of the things that, by the way, we got Jack Blake in the background. We got Maduno on the sound.
They're amazing.
It out. So what do you want to talk about today?
Oh, I thought you had a plan.
Yeah, a little bit. It's more of a soft plan.
I love your plans.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so one of the things that we were talking about in the last few days have been around emotion, specifically the dirty word anger.
Yeah.
Tell me all your angers.
Well, it's interesting you brought that up. For those of you that are listening, we do coaching sessions quite often. Zach is, I would say you're my life coach, so to speak.
Honored.
Much more than that, but just to break it down simply. And so yesterday we were meeting actually to discuss content. We write content together around life coaching, and I went in expecting to work, and it was hilarious because you just knew right away that something was up. And so you looked at me and you were like, why are you so angry? And anger is not something that I have ever been able to fully tap into. It is always usually camouflaged by sadness, or I would say the correct word is restlessness. I get extremely restless. And so as soon as you said it, I felt offended.
You never get offended at me.
You were like, why are you angry? And I was like, how dare you just assume I'm angry?
For those of you that can't see Casey, she's putting gloves on right now. I'm just kidding.
Not at all.
Seriously.
Kind of.
I'm just kidding.
So it was interesting because I realized even in that moment and that question, I was like, anger? I'm not angry. Like, what are you talking about? And then I just realized you were digging a little deeper and asking me some questions around it, and I'm sure was angry.
Beep.
There's no beep. I was angry.
No. I wanted there to be a beep. That's fine.
Okay, it's good.
That's good. I appreciate you sharing that. I wasn't sure where you were going to go with that, but it's interesting. So you showed up in the fashion of you just seemed really anxious, feeling anxiety, and we had a job to do in front of us. We had some stuff that we needed to work on, and I would say that as your friend, as your ally, it felt like you weren't able to be like fully like emotionally present.
No, you're right.
And then you were kind enough to allow me to kind of prod the bear, if you will, and
Yeah.
ask like, "Hey, are you okay?" Like,
I think in those moments, if, you and I have talked about this on several different venues, whether it's video, podcasts, but we've talked about if we're able to pause and just kind of assess what's going on, we end up not only learning more about ourselves, but also having the ability to. I was able to have a gift yesterday of working through something that I had never been able to acknowledge, I would say. And so it was the gift of acknowledging the fact that I have anger, which for society, like, let's break that down right now. Like, anger is a dirty word, like you said. It's the villainized emotion of society.
big time.
And while it's normally...
He's got an anger problem. They've got an anger
Yes.
problem.
You immediately assume it's someone beating their wife or it's someone screaming and throwing things anytime you hear the word anger.
Wow.
At least that's my perception.
Totally.
And so I think that I just want to unvillainize it, if that's even a word,
That's good. I like that.
and just really assess the fact that we're all carrying around, usually by the time we hit anger, it's a secondary emotion that has to do with mainly fear or shame, is what I've been taught kind of growing up around that. Usually by the time anger is coming forth, you have been battling fear around something, or you're you're operating out of shame. And so anger is kind of the outward or the secondary emotion that you'll begin to feel. You'll feel it in your body. You'll feel it as you...
Would you throw sadness in there?
I think
Fear or shame?
It's funny because in my mind, I always view masking anger with sadness. Like it's easier to, so I kind of view that down the road a little bit. Like, but yes, you're right. It could be for sure. I usually find that most people who are angry, what you'll see on them first before anger is sadness. So it's what they use to mask it, so to speak. Because
Interesting.
anger is not a permittable emotion. It's becoming more talked about, but it's not necessarily what we permit ourselves to go towards first.
Okay.
It's usually sadness. That usually is easier. Now that I'm speaking from a female point of view. That's mainly a female point of view. I don't
That's
know
good.
in regards to the male.
Keep going. So you're talking about you were saying in your thought process, anger is covered up by sadness, but it's usually, anger itself is usually covering in some sense fear or shame.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
If you were able to really break it down. And so for me, I had some fear around some stuff yesterday. If we got down to the root of it, that underlying condition was based out of fear. And remember, one of the exercises that I loved is you gave me permission just to begin rattling off everything I was angry about. So for those of you listening, we're in this coffee shop. I'll paint a picture for you. It's this beautiful hipster coffee shop.
It's very, very hipster.
Very hipster. There's a ton of people. It's packed. It's we're there just to work. We're there to get a job done, like you're saying.
Very exposed atmosphere.
Very exposed. So it wasn't necessarily the time or place in many people's minds for me to get angry.
It's a perfect time.
It was a perfect time.
Like a bull in a china shop.
So we were sitting across from one another. You asked that question, what is it that you're so angry about? And you said, I want you to just start rattling it off. There's no wrong answer.
It took forever because, I mean, there was like a good 45 seconds, which felt like an eternity in my world.
I felt like it was a couple minutes I
Right.
couldn't even answer. Yeah.
You literally were like, I'm fine. You and I, and the sandwich and coffee. I was like, hey, so just rattle anything off. Right, go ahead.
Yeah, and so I had my journal in front of me, and, but it was I loved it because you beautifully had said, there's no wrong answer. Which, for someone who's performed my whole life, there's always a wrong answer. There's a right way and a wrong way of doing something. And even in self-healing and self-help, I've had to take a step back and realize that I view it through that lens. There's a right way of healing my heart, and there's a wrong way. And so for you to say that in that moment was really cool because it gave me permission just to begin to rattle off things. And you were like, it could be the fact that you don't like the color of this wall, or it could be the fact that something happened yesterday. So you were able to give me permission. And I think I said a few things that were silly in my mind, like utterly silly. And, but that is the point I'm getting to is that I loved that when we can stop and just give ourselves permission to be angry, being there's no wrong answer. If we pause and take time to write that down, it's really cool what can be exposed, what's going on in our heart, so to speak.
That's good. So we were walking through that exercise, and I'm trying to remember because it was really neat to be present with you in that moment.
Oh, thanks.
And hold space and just have you process, if you will, to be a little vulnerable.
Yes.
But what is fascinating to me is when we back up from that whole scenario and we're going, you said the statement like there's no wrong answer. Something I want to clarify for people is that when you're asking yourself questions and you're getting to know yourself and you're beginning to identify the why behind your heart, something I want to remind people to do is permission themselves to speak without giving themselves a preemptive consequence. Like there's no judgment, there's no wrong answer. You're not going to offend, And so what was beautiful about that was that you're like, oh, this coffee sucks, or like whatever it is going down the list. What it does is it gets the juices flowing of our permissioning ourselves to just show up raw, authentically, honestly, and speak from the heart without fear of consequence, if you will. Yeah. And for some people that can be really exposing because we never have been permissioned. Well, we experienced consequence or we witnessed consequence when said anger was expressed. So Mom and Dad, if you're listening, I love you. This is good. Thank you for doing your work, but I'm going to expose some of my experience right now. It's beautiful. Thank you. All that being said, when I was a young lad, I witnessed anger being expressed in a very unsafe way. My dad had no context or even grid on how to express his anger. So I learned at the young age, I think I was 7 years old, I remember standing in my bedroom, my dad and mom are yelling at each other and fighting and arguing, and it's bad. But what I remember in that context was standing in my room, still as can be. My sisters are in their rooms weeping, and I'm standing still as a brick, just dead cold-faced. If you ever saw one of the worst movies ever created, scared me to death, The Shining.
Oh,
I'm standing still, cold-faced, like a child at the end of the hallway. And I'll never forget my sister looking at me saying, "Why aren't you crying?" And I said, "What's it gonna change?"
Wow.
In that moment, I realized I was conditioning myself based on my experience, if you will, or circumstances, that expressing anger isn't safe.
Would you say, I know that you and I have talked quite a bit about inner vows. Was that an inner vow moment?
Big time. Don't cry. It's not going to change anything.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I said to myself in that moment. Don't cry. It's not going to change anything. So I taught myself out of survival. We have the survival mechanisms, fight, flight, or freeze. I froze. I just shut it down. I was like, oh, let's go ahead and just shut this whole thing down. You're not allowed to feel anger, and you're also not allowed to cry. Ironically, like I grew up very, very sensitive. My mom always told me, be a gentleman, be a gentleman, be a gentleman. And so I know if there's any guys listening to this, or for all the men listening to this, if you've ever been told that, it's interesting the connotation that comes with it, the expectation. Yesterday you're sharing about expectations.
Yeah.
And I'll let you, if you and when you decide to share that. But the expectations I felt or I translated growing up put on me were, you're not allowed to express your anger, not even in the moment, yet alone later. You've got to come up with some way to sidestep it and talk about how you're disappointed or flustered or frustrated. So I remember the first time I physically went out of my way to express my anger. I was a teenager, and my dad and I got into it. I stepped into one of their arguments, and I was rough and buff. I had a big old gut, but I was a big boy. I was really big at the time, and I felt really confident. And I was stepping up to the plate, so I thought, and getting in my dad's face, and it was really ugly. My mom said, "If you love me, I want you to leave." I walked out the door. I was so furious because I'd never really gone
yourself.
there.
Yeah.
And so I left, but I went to this lake by myself and I was pacing back and forth. I had no idea what to do with all this rage I felt. And I yanked this picnic bench out of the concrete. And to this day, I have like an adjustment I have to get every few months in my mid back because of that anger. I like subluxed my middle vertebrae or something.
Oh my gosh.
Ripping this bench out of the concrete. And I'll never forget seeing this bench come out of the concrete and go like, oh my God, that's in there. And in that moment, I was like, don't do that again.
Yeah.
Your anger is scary. So I say all that to say, that's an interesting. I share that for the sake of exposing not learning or permissioning myself or ever having seen it modeled, anger being expressed, ended up coming out sideways.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's always the saying. I think we talked about it last week.
Yeah.
If you don't express your anger, it will end up coming out sideways in
Yeah.
some form or fashion.
Yeah. And so how that looked for me was massively reactive. Or when I felt like someone was going to be a bully to me or they were going to hurt my feelings or be really rough with me early on, I would do it first because I was so petrified and tired of being the blunt of other people's anger. Yeah. So I realized, like, oh, just go there first so they don't, like, so you don't have to experience the consequence over and over again until finally I'll never forget, I couldn't stand my mother for it, but she looked at me and she said, I genuinely don't recognize you anymore. You used to have a soft heart. What happened? I was furious because I was like, this was taken from me.
Yeah.
This softness, this was taken from me by means of brute force.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, have you ever had that happen where, like, what's your relationship to anger, so to speak?
Well, that's interesting. That's a really good question. I would say I was never, ever given permission to be angry. I was actually talking to Steven, who's back there. He's amazing. Earlier this morning, we were having a conversation around this very thing that, yes, there is family dynamics, but there's also social dynamics outside of that. And growing up in the South, like this is something you and I have hit on before, what you present is very important as a family. So
Where out in the South are you from?
Well, I was born in Tifton, Georgia.
Go ahead, say it again.
Tifton, Georgia. I'm a Georgia peach. Yes. So, but I was raised in Kentucky, and my dad, he was, raised in Alabama, Georgia. He actually passed away 11 years ago, so I'm going to share some vulnerable things about my family, but I have permission to do so. So he very much grew up in a culture where kids are seen and not heard. Kids are, they need to look clean all the time. They need to, you don't run around, you don't get dirty, the house needs to look a certain way. Because it was this thing of if anyone drops by at any moment, what will they think of us? Like if we were actually real and raw and just living life.
Easy now.
And so, not what I meant.
No, but, I mean, like,
yeah.
like, Chan, go clean the curtains.
Yes,
company
totally. Well, that's
right.
kind of how I grew up, and he was a product of his environment,
right.
And so I remember, and I'm getting to my point around anger, but I remember that. And I actually talked to my mom. It was a beautiful conversation last night, but she was saying that he would come home when we were young, and if we weren't presentable, so to speak, meaning like in clean clothes, our hair done perfectly, the house clean, he would begin to just kind of rant and rail on her. He would say, what have you done all day? Are you just watching soap operas? Like, what are you doing? But he would do that in front of us. And so there was a ton of tension and a ton of anger. My mom's so sweet. She and my dad were married 13 years before they divorced, but she said, I remember year one, just something being off, but I stayed 13 years. It's just because it's what you did. She was part of a religious organization. She was part of the South. Like, you didn't get divorced. And so I remember actually in my childhood being one of the first families with divorced parents in our little, like, small neighborhood. Like, we were, it was a big deal where we came from. And so it's way more common now, but that wasn't a thing back then. And so, but all that to say, rerouting, getting back there is, I learned very early on with as much tension going on in my household, that I was not allowed to have a voice in that arena. I was not allowed to have a voice with anger or frustration, and that in fact, I needed to perform or be pretty in order to keep the peace. And so just with the social dynamics of what took place in my family. And so that was kind of a message I took on at about 5 or 6. And she was sharing this other memory with me last night, and we had talked about it. The fact she had asked my dad to go get my hair cut at Fantastic Sam's. Do you remember Fantastic?
I love the Fantastic Sam's.
Did you ever get the bowl cut?
Look at me. I had a mullet. It's epic, and yes, there's proof.
Well, I had like curly Sue hair to the point where, I mean, it was crazy, as is, like ringlets.
You full on participated in this.
Yes, I had ringlets. So my mom was like, I need you to go get her hair cut at Fantastic Sam's. Well, my dad thought it would be a glorious idea to get me a perm on top of the already curly hair I had. So he wanted to get me a perm. I think he just felt like it was his gift to me.
What's a gift?
I was 5 or 6 at the time. And I remember he brought me home, and my mom's so amazing. Her and I both have walked through this glorious healing journey together, and she's like, I'm totally fine if you share this, but she reacted extremely severely to my dad in that moment. And it was to the point where I was standing there and she was yelling, what have you done to her? Like, because my hair was so out of control, but she was like, what have you done? Aww. Like, look at her. What have you done to her? And so in that moment, as a 5 or 6-year-old little girl, I just realized, like, I have to be something else in order to keep the peace. Like, I have to perform, or I have to look okay, or I have to be pretty. And I've carried that lens through my whole life, that lens does not permit anger. There's no space for anger with that lens or that badge of honor of I have to perform, present, and be pretty.
So what do you do today? Let me interrupt you.
Yeah.
What do you do today? I noticed you just did it. What do you do today and I'm only inviting you I'm asking this because I know you. Mm-hmm. But what do you do today whenever you get angry in a moment? And so whenever someone like really ticks you off in a moment, but to stay
presentable, you mean?
Sure. What do you do right when you get angry? Face to face with someone?
You're going to have to tell me because it's so subconscious. I don't really know. Like I get, I would say I can feel it in my body, but I just I think I tense up. Do I tense up? What do I do?
You smile and you tense up. You move your hair to the side and you go, okay, so.
It's the Southern, like, I'm going to kill someone in
if someone's pointing a camera at me, they're never going to know I'm threatening your life right now. You do that smile in the grocery store thing to your kids. You're like, okay, so I'm going to squeeze you like a zit.
Yes, when your kids are acting.
Yes, I'm like, so I'm going to shake you.
Yeah, I mean, those listening can't see us right now, but seriously, I guess I do. I did just do it. I tensed up, even talking.
You put your hands in front of you. You did the prim and proper thing. You smile real big. You're like, all right,
what are
I'm
you
shining.
doing right now? I'm going to kill you later. It's fine. So that being said, that's kind of how I've trained my body, my mind, my thought process, and that's my relationship to anger. Like I'm fully aware now that I feel it in my body, but I have never given myself permission to, I would say, fully act on it. I've only associated anger with aggressive behavior. So I've never realized that it's just there's a normality about anger in our everyday life. That if we are able to process it outside of aggressive behavior, that we can learn the tools so that it doesn't come out sideways. Because I'm a very reactionary person, and it's because I don't ever tap into my anger. So that you will know when you've crossed the line, and it takes a really long time because I will perform and not let myself go there or tap into it, and then all of a sudden I'll just snap, which I don't feel like you've ever seen those moments, have you?
So moving on to the next, brings me to my next slide. I was having an interesting conversation with Ben earlier this morning, and I was fascinated by his definition of rage. I said, "What is rage?" He said, "It's a burning anger." And forgive me, Ben, if I'm butchering this, but it's an enacting out of anger, but towards someone else. It's a pointed anger, And so I'm asking him, like, when is anger okay and when's it not? And his definition was when I'm taking it and I'm superimposing a consequence upon someone else out of my own anger.
That's good.
And I thought, well, that makes sense. There's a delineation there. Okay, I can handle that. But for something, I read a book once, and this guy describes, I forgot the name of the book, I'll remember it later, but this guy described emotions as an envelope. Sorry, Jack, I didn't. Shout out. Shout out to the author that I'll recognize later. Love you. Long time. But this author put emotions as an envelope. He said, you get them, you open them up, you read it fully. It's really just trying to relay a message to your heart. It's either protecting or it's connecting, whatever.
Yeah.
And so in the moment of feeling anger, I want to invite those of you listening and watching to consider that the emotion that you're feeling is trying to tell you something. So stepping out almost from a curiosity standpoint and looking at yourself going, what am I feeling? Where am I feeling it in my body? Typically anger shows up in your arms, your chest, your gut. Your jaw tightens.
Yeah.
Sometimes you smile really big and you put your hands in front of you so you don't shake a baby. Anyway, so that's inappropriate. Don't say that. Anyway, moving on. But honoring the emotion from the standpoint of what is the underlying message? What is this saying about me? What's the narrative behind this? So going back to the exercise that we were walking through yesterday, at the hipster place, was you listing off stuff that you were ticked off about. That moment, that day, in general, about life.
Yeah.
Stuff got deep, it was shallow, it doesn't matter. What was beautiful about it was once we step back from it and you're looking at it, what are you saying to yourself about what the message or the narrative is about it is leading you to do work.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So I realized as a whole, after listing all those things, listing, there I go, I got it.
That's fine. I've done worse.
Listing all those things off, that sometimes when you're angry, there's a sense of powerlessness that really takes place. And there's a sense of not being in control. Control and anger usually tie hand in hand pretty quickly. And so I feel like yesterday I realized I don't feel powerful. Hence, I'm angry right now. And it's coming out sideways in all these different avenues. But it was that moment of how do I take my power back? And what does feeling powerful look like? Because the anger was trying to tell me something, as you're saying. It's opening that envelope saying, look, like something's going on, something's off kilter. And so I realized that whether it's my little girl or it was just me in the present, like I wasn't feeling powerful. And so...
It's beautiful that you were willing to honor the emotion, and it was really attempting to reveal pain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely revealing pain. And so I think that, and then it was beautiful because you asked me the question, what does it look like for you to feel powerful? And that took me a minute because I guess when you felt powerless for so long, you don't even invite yourself into, that becomes the norm. Feeling powerless has become my norm. And so it's my restlessness constantly. It's my frustration, my anger. So to even allow myself to ask, what is it like to feel powerful? Do you remember? I couldn't answer. It took me a really long time to answer. Just sat there crying because I had never given myself permission to look at life differently. Because
you're so in that moment, and forgive me if I'm speaking out of context, but because you condition yourself to do that out of survival.
Yes.
So we're all like, when we're young, we're professional firefighters. We're looking to put out the fire of pain or disconnection or rejection in our surroundings. So yours was look pretty, have everything together.
Perform. Yes, in order to feel accepted and connected.
Accepted and connected,
also,
and there's peace.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So those were kind of the big things for me. And then also, like, you're not allowed to step into anger. Like, you're not allowed to like you have to behave in this certain manner in order to feel connection and accepted. And so,
coattail this if there's anything to add to this, but that's kind of your firefighter mechanism. So if you're going to put out a fire, if you're going to like make sure that nothing bursts up in flames,
I do that for
your
everyone.
Fire hydrant is how can we fix this together? Yes. Let's not be.
It's become literally my weapon. I guess you could call it a weapon, so to speak, to where I will go around, and it's what I use to. So weapon's not the right word. Let me think of one, but it's to ensure.
It's your tool?
Yeah, my tool to ensure that
mechanism. Yeah.
That there is safety, because that's the only time I had a sense of safety. Now, it was false safety, but was when I performed or I put out fires or I presented well or I fixed things. If things were fixed, then there wasn't the anger or the frustration in my home growing up. There wasn't the screaming matches. If I could just sit still and be pretty, like everything was okay. And so I will literally go out of my way on behalf of people to make sure that they don't have to experience pain, because that's the only way that I understood safety growing up, is if there was no pain, everything was okay, everything was calm, everything looked pretty.
That makes sense. So I appreciate you sharing that. I guess my question is, what do we want to invite people or lead them into anger being, it's an unto emotion. If you mentioned this morning, like, I still feel tapped into my anger. Like, I feel that in my body and my hands.
Yeah.
So I guess one of my thoughts that comes to my mind is to invite ourselves, to invite other people, if you're listening, to experience your anger without judgment. And we'll talk about that in a second. Unto honoring the emotion that it is protecting or covering. So the story in my head is that I've experienced a lot of deep sadness, a lot of frustration, that's a nice word of putting anger, but a lot of pain and a lot of fear of experiencing that pain again. And so for me, when I'm willing to stand up for myself and maybe come across as, I'm an 8 on the Enneagram, and one of the things that is assimilated with 8s and their reputation, so to speak, is their anger. And I got really offended by that. I'm like, I do not have an anger. I do not have an anger problem.
That's amazing.
It's a little creepy anyway. But I took pride in the fact of like, hold it together.
Hold it together. Yep, it's my whole life. Yeah.
We're fine. don't let it break at the seams. I forgot where I was going there. But the invitation unto. Like, where are you going? So the invitation is to express your anger, right, in a safe manner. So for me, I just started doing this in the last year, and it's started to work out. There's a mild consequence to it of losing my voice, but I will typically be either in my house or in my vehicle, and I'll just feel what I'm feeling fully. Maybe I have some sadness or some rage, but I'll scream in the midst of my car. I'll like grip my steering wheel as hard as I can. And, I had an encounter a few weeks ago where some people crossed some really big boundaries in my life, and I had no idea what to do with the anger. I went and threw an axe the next day at the axe throwing place, and it felt good, but I needed to deliberately express my anger.
Yeah.
And I genuinely want to invite people into that space to where there needs to be a permissioning to express anger. We're walking around like a bunch of zombies who aren't owning how we feel, not for the sake of entitlement, but for the sake of expressing it so that you can move on. There's a shout out Jack Blake, Coming This Way. It's what's the book called that we were just talking about? So The Body Keeps the Score. Yeah. And in that book, it talks about also another shout out, The Emotion Code, great book. Both these books are basically, the beginning of them are talking about how emotions are literally stored in our body and how we experience over the course of time dis-ease because these emotions have never been fully expressed and allowed to pass. Kind of like the train through the tunnel we were talking about a few weeks ago. So the invitation, and I'll kind of pass the ball on to you to let you share your thoughts on this. But the invitation is to safely express anger to where there's no immediate someone's not paying the cost.
Yeah.
You know what I
There's
mean?
consequence on it.
There's not cops showing up at your house saying like, where are the bodies?
And that's
you know.
usually the case when they don't express anger properly.
Yeah. There's this saying goes in the I'll just say in different circles, and that is be afraid of the quiet ones. You're never afraid of the loud ones. Be afraid of the quiet ones because they're going to hurt you. The ones smiling in the corner who are from Georgia. No, I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. Be afraid. Go away, pain. No, so yeah, what are your thoughts on just leading people through the process of feeling anger fully, owning it, and stewarding the message that's behind it so that you can honor the secondary emotion behind it?
Yeah, I think that's good. I think it's such a great dialogue to have because I know for me, I've always grown up, if anyone was angry, you did everything you could to calm them down instead of letting them express their anger. So there's two thought processes. The first one is like, there's the whole breathing techniques. If you're angry, like just take deep breaths and calm down. But what you're asking for is you're saying, no, how do we have healthy outlets to release this? And so that's a different conversation. So I think, number one, giving ourselves permission to not calm down if it's a safe place to not calm down. So, giving ourselves permission to take a step back or to go in a different room and to express our anger, like you said, to where no one pays the consequence. But permissioning ourselves, I think, is the first step.
That's good.
The second thing I would say is finding what works for you. We've read through a bunch of different studies on, is it punching a punching bag? Is it screaming into a pillow? Is it, what does it look like? But anger is felt in the body, so we need to do something physical to release it, so to speak. And so whether that's using your voice, that's punching a punching bag. I have a punching bag. I hit it hard.
You hit a punching bag.
I hit a punching bag. Or I run sprints. I will do interval sprints to where I'll start out jogging. I will hit this moment and I will just run as fast.
Do you make an angry face when you do it?
I kind of do. I did yesterday at the gym. I literally had on like this music that just got me going and I was sprinting. And obviously you have to be careful. You don't want to hurt yourself.
Turn on some rap and handle it.
I did gangster rap and I handled it. That's my saying. So, but yeah, so I think the biggest deal and what we're trying to invite people into is permission to feel angry so that it doesn't come out sideways, so that you don't explode on your children, so that you aren't screaming at your husband or significant other for no reason. And so the biggest key is permissioning yourself. And then when you begin to understand how your body is related to anger and how it works, those are the times where you can learn the breathing exercises. Those are the moments where you'll know, okay, I actually do need to calm down.
Like managing a trigger, so to speak.
Yeah, what can I do to calm down? And so, but if you've never had a relationship with anger or permitted yourself to have one, I think it's knowing that it's going to take some time, but getting familiar with anger and how it operates in your body and how it usually comes out. So for me, I'm a reactor. I will go so long without reacting, and then I'll just explode. But how cool would it be instead just tapping into my anger along the way to where I'm not ever exploding on my kids or exploding on my friends or whatever. I actually have tools in my
release
tool belt.
Valve, so to speak.
Yeah, it is like a release valve along the way. So
that's good.
To the point where you can, I hate using the word manage it, but understand it.
It's kind of like the whole dialogue around depression and sadness. It's almost like we want to keep it there. You ever met someone that's just so angry? It's almost as if like that's their best friend. Mm-hmm. They just keep it around. Mm-hmm. The reality is that when we're willing, I'll step out on a ledge here, when we're willing to own what we're angry at and where it stems from or what the message is or the story that we're being motivated by or that we're tapping into, when we're willing to expose the elephant in the room, it loses its power.
It's true.
Uh-huh. And so I've met my fair share of people that are just like literally the common denominator that you always experience with them is they're angry. Mm-hmm. You're such an angry soul. I'm
scared.
Well, I'm nervous. So, I mean, besides wearing a bulletproof vest around them, one can only invite someone of that nature, and if they're looking to take ownership of their journey, and so to speak, or if it's just yourself and you're listening to this, anger is a gift, but it is to move unto something else. It is not a place to stay, because that tension, our nervous system, like the whole nine. That's why a lot of people experience such. They gotta tap into heavy drugs in order to
numb it
or calm their body down, calm their senses to where they're like, I can't function. When in all reality, they just need to tap into their rage and let it go. Like, express it, feel it fully, express it, and then maybe grieve the sadness or the fear and the shame that you were talking about. It's protecting.
It. Yeah. It's good.
That's good. Echo. That's awesome. Yeah. So we're going to take a break, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Feel free to jump in there with questions, guys. Talk to you soon. I just read a story this morning about a lady who was a 5th-degree black belt. I didn't know that was such a thing. 5th-degree black belt, and she got mugged by one guy. And come to find out that she hadn't like trained her brain, that when she experienced being like petrified, she hadn't had like real life training from a grown man coming up and like simulating an attack. And so what she did to retrain her brain to connect experiencing fight or flight with retraining her brain to properly react and not stand in fear and be paralyzed, she went to a 5th-degree black belt, went to a self-defense class at which the guy wears pads, and he does like a live exercise where he goes to like mug or take advantage of a woman, and he yells at her, and she whooped his butt. But then a few months later, like 3 guys approach her in the middle of the night while she's walking home late from a shift, and they're like, hey lady, this will only take a second. We need you, give up your money, whatever it is. And she gets into like this stance, and she's like, oh, I've been waiting for this. Who's up first? And the guys ran. But what had happened was she retrained her brain to tap into that anger instead of allowing her fear to paralyze herself. So it's just fascinating. But one of the things I wanted to wrap this up about is basically list out, there's to oversimplify, not from a place of authority, but just to kind of give my context. When you're feeling anger, identify it and give it its own voice, so to speak, like you're talking about earlier.
Yeah.
So level 1 anger, I'm just going to vocalize or write it down in order to give anger its place.
It's permission.
Exactly. To permission the anger, I'm going to say, I am angry. I am upset about X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
Right? Level 1. Write it down or vocalize it. A lot of time, like Jack was saying earlier, just breathing deep or allowing it that space will release it. It was given space. Level 2, text a friend and say, hey, I need to vent to you. I don't need you to fix this. I just want to be heard.
Yeah.
Affirmed in my space.
Yeah.
Just tell me it's going to be okay. And then I call and give that person an earful.
For some people, that's the first time that anger actually has a voice in regards to someone else listening for them. They're like, let me give myself permission for it to have a voice and somebody else hear it.
You know what's good about that is I feel like sometimes we're really scared about accusing well, like really getting eloquent with our accusations. With like anger, typically we have an accusation towards someone or something or ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? And so I love what Tony Robbins says. He said, if you're going to blame them eloquently. Blame them for your greatness as well. Well, tapping into your anger, maybe consider being willing to vocalize all the accusations that you're sitting on. I think they're this, I think they're this, I think they're this. And from the standpoint of anger, that unleashes the dam, so to speak, and reveals all the sitting waters that are waiting there to be released. And that's maybe all the narratives, all the stories that you're living out of that.
Yeah. And you're already thinking it. And so when you're able to vocalize it, it loses its power, so to speak.
That's good.
You're thinking it, you're feeling it, you're walking around with this story. And the second you vocalize it, it's like it's put out into the atmosphere, so to speak, and it loses its power of being caged inside of you.
Yeah, that's good.
You give permission for it to be free.
That's good. And then level 3 being the obvious, where you have to take massive action, where you need to go either do sprints or scream in your car or hit a punching bag, but with the deliberate intention of holding space for the secondary emotion, whether it be fear, shame, or sadness, like you're saying.
No, getting past the point of anger,
Yeah.
getting through it, releasing it from your body, and seeing what's left. I'm actually really scared about this, or actually feel a lot of shame around this.
Yeah. So anger, utilizing anger from a segue emotion.
To
You
do
ever see
work.
those?
Yeah.
You ever see those segues when people would stand up on them? They would move from place to place. The mall cop, what's up? Get Paul Blart out of your mind for a second.
I can't.
So the Segway being it's a transportation vehicle. It's somewhere to move you from point A to point B. Well, anger, maybe consider using anger as a segue emotion to move you from point A where you're currently at, and there's these narratives, there's this pain, there's this sadness or shame that maybe hasn't been revealed to you, but you're feeling anger. So it's going to move you towards revealing that and expressing it.
Yeah, that's good.
Outro. Go.
Outro.
Outro is like, appreciate you guys joining us. Love you much. See you on the next roll.